Good evening and welcome to another episode of Results PNG. Tonight we feature a report on the 3rd National Mining Emergency Response Challenge, NMERC, hosted by Oktedi Mining Limited, OTML, and we talk to the country manager of the World Bank, Laura Bailey, about the Women in Mining initiative that aims to engage and empower women in mining affected communities. But first we take a look at this report on the NMERC.
The 3rd National Mining Emergency Response Challenge was hosted by Oktedi Mining Limited in Port Moresby on the 28th and 29th of August 2013. The event follows a very successful National Mining Safety Week that was held across all mines in the country in March 2013. The purpose of hosting this challenge every year is to bring mining and petroleum companies together in the year to interact by not only forming a close working partnership, but also to learn from each other, share skills and ideas on mine emergency and rescue procedures, as well as how they put them into action in their own working areas. The 2013 National Mining Emergency Rescue Challenge was held at the Murray Barracks in Port Moresby from August 28th to 29th. The competition involved participating teams to respond to artificially created emergency scenarios on firefighting, hazardous chemicals, search and rescue, rope rescue, multi-casualty, endurance, and a written theory paper. Oktedi Mining Limited's Managing Director Nigel Parker commended all those who participated and thanked the Chief Inspector of Mines for the initiative.
On behalf of OTML, as host, I would also like to acknowledge the organisational work undertaken by Bruce Hill and his team in putting this event together. These events highlight the importance of safety in our industry. At OTML, safety is our #1 priority. And we recognise the value of participation at national level. These events provide a rich environment for learning and improvements. None of these national events would be successful without the stewardship of the Chief Inspector of Mines and his team. The Emergency Response Challenge over the past 2 days has been a great event, and I'm honoured to lead the company that has had responsibility this year for organising the event.
In thanking the organisers, the Chief Inspector of Mines, Mohan Singh, noted that the National Mine Emergency Rescue Challenge was an innovative concept that has evolved to greater heights over the recent past.
When I looked at across Australia and other jurisdictions, I came to know that events like this, they are mainly driven by the industry, not by the regulator. So I had a challenge of that reverse engineering, that instead of the industry, probably the regulator has to take an initiative. And Governor, that is where the innovation came in that you mentioned. The innovation was, I have 2 hands, 1 head, 2 eyes. I have my own limitation. But I have hundreds of hands, I have thousands of brains. And I have, millions of feelings or sentiments running across the country. And my strategy or innovation was how I can bring them onto the one platform. And this is how the story of evolution, so to say, started in PNG 3 years back. And over these 3 years, I can very clearly see that evolution coming up. In 2011, we had only 5 teams participating in the ER challenge. This year, there are 9 teams. And you already know that we have 1 team exclusively represented by ladies. This is something unique. I don't know any jurisdiction in any jurisdiction across Australia or other places, there could be teams which are exclusively represented by ladies. This is something which is very, very encouraging. And I don't know whether it is a result of the innovation that we have put in or the interest that the industry is showing towards this place.
The increasing interest shown by the industry players was also demonstrated by the involvement of Oil Search amongst all the mining companies. Oil Search performed exceptionally well, thrashing the miners to take out the winning trophy. Oil Search finished off the event with top placings for the following events: Best Team Safety, Best Team First Aid, Best Individual Theory, Best Team Theory, Best Team Firefighting, Best Team Multi-Casualty, Best Medic, Best Team Captain.
A good leader is only as good as his team. And for me, personally, I've got the best team in the country. Thank you very much.
Best Team Overall. Chief Inspectors Award. This is the second year running that Mr. Airy and Mr. Lotte have won the Best Captain and Best Medic awards respectively.
Second place goes to Oil Search.
Team Oil Search finished second in the following events: Rope Rescue, Handling Hazardous Material, and Search and Rescue, and finished third in Team Endurance event.
It gives me great pleasure to call up
Team Barrick Pogra won the Best Safety Song, Endurance and Rope Rescue Challenges, while Ramonika were winners of Best Safety Poster winner. Lihir won the Search and Rescue Challenge, while Morobe Mining Joint Venture scooped up the Hazardous Chemicals Response Challenge. The other winners included Team Ramonikal Mine for Encouragement Award, Team Ramonikal Refinery for Most Improved Team Award, and Team Lihir for Most Helpful Team.
Women in Mining Initiative, that's next. Stay tuned. In this next interview, we find out about the World Bank-supported Women in Mining initiative that enables women in mining-affected communities to participate more equitably in mining benefits and decision-making processes. We now join Charlene Gawi in this interview with Laura Bailey, Country Manager of the World Bank.
Good evening, Laura.
Good evening.
Laura, just reflecting on the World Bank support for women in mining, in the Women in Mining initiative, what have been some key achievements in the past few years?
Well, thanks for that question. Our Women in Mining work began back in 2003 and 4 with a simple but stunning observation. In the course of the work that the World Bank was doing to support government to modernize the mining sector in Papua New Guinea, and in spite of all of the attention that was being placed on engagement with communities, we heard a startling message. We heard that the women and children felt that their needs, their concerns, their issues were not being addressed. What the women said to us was this: we bear most of the costs, we see few of the benefits, and we are silent. No one hears us. It was a result of that startling conversation that inspired us to work together with government and the industry to develop a program for women's self-reliance in mining and petroleum communities. That program ran from 2005 to 2010. What we did is we tapped into a pot of money, a wonderful source called the Japan Social Development Fund, which is a global pot of money donated by the government of Japan to be administered by the World Bank to help address challenging social issues in developing countries like Papua New Guinea. So through the program from 2005 to 2010, the World Bank worked with the Chamber of Mines and Petroleum and its members, with the government, the Minerals Resource Authority and the Department of Minerals Policy, and with communities to try and support thousands of women who are members of dozens of women's associations to do some very important things to empower themselves and make themselves more self-reliant. The first thing we did was worked with them to assess their needs and aspirations, Next, we did some core training and capacity building for the women's groups to make them be better organized, more financially viable, more effective, and to just generally be better able to channel the needs and aspirations of the women and children in the community. Then we customized some training programs based on what the women themselves said they'd like. So when the women around Porgera said, we need help on agriculture, we customized training for them. When the women in the Eastern Highlands said, we need some help on economic activities, we worked with them. When the women on Lahir said, we need financial literacy and basic adult literacy training, we worked for them. And that program then enabled those women to become stronger advocates for the entire needs of their community, better informed lobbyists, if you will, to the companies and to government in order to address the negative impacts of mining. So because of those 5 years of work, we have thousands of women across the country who are more confident, better trained, more literate, and much more powerful as advocates for the well-being of their communities.
Laura, obviously the focus on women in the resource sector stems from the notions of gender politics and power relations in terms of women having a say in the decisions related to the extractive industries. How has the World Bank worked towards bringing women to important decision-making tables?
It's a really great question. Globally, the World Bank Group clearly has a role to play with all three key voices in the challenge of rebalancing power and bringing women to the table. What three voices am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about industry, I'm talking about government, and I'm talking about communities. So let's think about this. What do community needs? Well, you need communities to have the capacity and the skills to engage. You need communities to see a benefit to having women at the table. And the World Bank can help communities build that discussion and present themselves authoritatively, and that's the kind of work we do with our Women in Mining program. Now, you also need a government that's got access to some innovative ideas and an understanding of what has worked in other countries. And the World Bank's job, a big part of it, is to connect countries to each other. South-South experience is what we're all about. And it's a really interesting fact that right now, the government of Zimbabwe, all the way across the world, is busy using the case of Papua New Guinea as their example for how to bring women to the table. So this is a case of PNG teaching the world, not just PNG learning from the world. Fantastic. And then, of course, companies need help too. So you've got both the World Bank and our private sector arm, the International Finance Corporation, or IFC, and we have loads of programs that focus on helping companies improve the capacity of women in all of their operations. Women as employees in companies, women on executive positions in companies, but also women in the communities that their operations affect, like the women in mining and petroleum communities.
More of this interview after the break. Welcome back. Continuing our interview with Laura Bailey, Country Manager of the World Bank, we find out what are the key barriers that continue to hinder the participation of women in resource projects.
There's a lot of talk on the great stuff that's been happening, and obviously there is a marked improvement in women in mining in general, women that are employed in mines and women in those communities. What are some key barriers that remain and continue to hinder the participation of women in these resource projects?
Yeah, let's be realistic, there are barriers.
Yes.
I guess I'd say there are 4 types of barriers, and I think each of us can imagine examples of this. Let me spin through this a bit for you. Yes. The first is sociocultural barriers.
Right.
These are the norms that say women shouldn't work for cash, or women shouldn't be working in a man's field, or girls shouldn't aspire to raise themselves that high. These are really important barriers.
Yes.
They are barriers that are only changeable when a community or a country decides to change.
Yes.
And you see evidence of that. You see wonderful examples of women and girls playing important equal roles in their communities and their businesses, but it's still a little bit too rare. Yeah. So Our first barrier is sociocultural. Now, the next one is legal barriers.
Right.
Like my personal least favorite, which is the very outdated Employment Act. I'll
Yes.
bet most of our viewers don't know that the Employment Act in Papua New Guinea has a provision which it inherited from some very outdated legislation from Canada and Australia, I must say,
Yes.
that says women are not allowed to work in underground professions. Now, clearly this was originally a concern about women's small physical stature or perhaps their strength, and it
yes.
was meant to protect women from danger. But it's clearly outdated. If you're worried about people being in danger in occupations, you should worry about both men and women. What's happened is that this provision in the Employment Act has actually prevented women from a whole range of jobs that have nothing to do with underground. They just have to do with mining. So we do have a few legal barriers. I must say Papua New Guinea has relatively few legal barriers, and in a recent global publication called Women and Business and the Law, Papua New Guinea had only a couple of laws that were identified as constraining women for employment, and that's a really great thing, and we should celebrate that. Now, there's a third barrier that is what I would call the education and skills barrier. So this is women and girls not getting the right education and skills, and sometimes that has to do with them not having access to the right opportunities.
Right.
But it also may be that they're not getting the support they need from their family or their community.
Yes.
So girls might be discouraged from thinking about maths and science, which means that they may not be able to go into engineering. They might be encouraged to think about teaching, which is a really great profession, but if you have the aptitude to be a mining engineer, getting a degree in education is not going to help you. So those those skills and employment barriers still very much in play here in Papua New Guinea. Now the last one is really an intangible one. It's what I call the aspirational barrier.
Right.
This is if young women and girls are not reading stories and hearing about women doing great things in the extractives and minerals sectors,
Yes.
are they going to dream about it? Will they hope and aspire to be a mining engineer, to be the lead accountant, to be the head of a mining company? So we need to realize that what young girls and boys dream about is part of what they turn into. And having the opportunity for young girls to dream about a whole range of things is part of what enables them to find the perfect thing for them to do to contribute to their own well-being, their family's well-being, and their community's well-being. So we've got a range of barriers, and I would say all of those barriers in some way, large or small, are affecting us here in Papua New Guinea.
Indeed. I especially like that last point on aspirations. I think for our viewers, that's something that every person can think about. For those parents who have children, who have young girls as daughters, to encourage those aspirations, not only in the mining sector but in other industries. Yeah.
That's right, and we actually have a really active media, both television, radio, and print, that is pretty good at picking up success stories. So my practice is when I read a newspaper article about something fabulous happening to women and girls, I just make a point of sharing that with as many people as I can. That's a little thing that I can do to help spread the good word.
More Results PNG when we return. OTML has taken keen interest in the Oktedi Women in Mining. The Community Mine Continuation Agreement, CMCA, which is basically OTML's social license to operate, took specific steps to be more inclusive of women and the CMCA agreements themselves between the mining company, state and host communities by containing specific provisions for women, such as a guaranteed right to 10% of all benefit streams. The CMCA arrangement has paved way for the country's first formal woman representative, whose main duty is to advocate for women and children. In light of this, the World Bank released a publication titled "We Want What Oktedi Women Have." We continue with the World Bank country manager, Laura Bailey, about what this article means for women of PNG and some of the key lessons PNG's resource sector can learn from the Oktedi arrangement.
Laura, the World Bank has taken a keen interest in the Oktedi women. Indeed, the World Bank publication on Oktedi women carried a headline which read, "We want what Oktedi women have."
Yeah.
So I've read that one. What are some key lessons from the Oktedi arrangement that we can learn from?
That's a really great story. It's one of my favorites. For our viewers, let me quickly tell you what the headline refers to. "We want what the Oktedi women have" is a battle cry that we heard in the March 2010 Women in Mining Conference. And it refers to the fact that in 2007, when all of the communities affected by the Oktedi mine were going through their periodic 5-year review, which is called the Community Mine Continuation Agreement, or CMCA, they got an amazing result. First, they got a seat at the table. The first time ever in Papua New Guinea, and even more impressively, the first time that we know of in the world, where there was formal female representation whose job was to advocate for the needs of women and children. They got to the table. What did they do? Well, they did something magical, because they then got a dedicated benefit stream of 10% for women and children's activities. They got an agreement that funds, in terms of compensation payments, would be paid into family bank accounts that women were co-signatories on. They got an agreement that 50% of the scholarships that would be funded would go to girls. And they got a range of seats on the different governance bodies or boards that cover the Oktedi region. So you can imagine why the rest of the women of Papua New Guinea said, "We want what the Oktedi women have." Now let's think a little more technically about what this means. Well, we have some lessons from this experience, and these lessons are very relevant, not just for other countries, but even here in Papua New Guinea, where we have lots of other mines, oil and gas projects. We learned 3 lessons about the process of getting women to the table, so I'll share those with you. The first one is, you have to make the business case to the mining company or the oil and gas company for why women should be involved. And the fact is, it's a pretty solid business case. We have evidence that when women are involved in the negotiation of agreements, because they help round out the full representation of the community, there is less conflict and there's a more equitable and efficient distribution of benefits. So that sounds like a good business case. The second thing we discovered from the Oktedi experience in 2007 is that you need to have separate preparation and coaching sessions where the women can get together and strategize and then enter into the formal negotiation process and come back out. That allows them to build the confidence and to develop strategies, and in this case, it turned out to be particularly effective. And the third lesson we learned was that having independent facilitators for the negotiation and having independent legal and technical advisors for the women gave them the courage, the confidence, and the technical knowledge they needed to be really effective at the negotiating table. So those are 3 key lessons that would be relevant. Now, since 2007, we've also done a fair bit of observation on what happened after this fabulous result. So we've learned a lot also about what do you do to ensure that the results of a negotiation are equitable. We've learned some important things. One is that benefits need to be structured and delivered in ways that are easy for communities to understand and transparent so they can be monitored. We also learned that family bank accounts with women as co-signatories was incredibly effective. And now, with the massive expansion on mobile banking here in our country, we've got great potential to involve even more women. We learned that setting aside a certain number of scholarships for girls was not enough. You also needed to think strategically about what are the barriers that prevent girls from going away to school, whether it's boarding school or university. What are the constraints that make families hesitate to send their girls away? So we need to think more creatively and structurally about how to support girls' education, not just through paying for their school fees. We learned that written public information is really important, even when you're working in rural communities that might have low levels of literacy, because it turns out that using very simple language in talk place with pictures or drawings can communicate a lot. And not doing that means that the community has a very low level of awareness. And that's really, really important. And then the last thing we learned is that you need to have some kind of way for communities to provide feedback and to complain. So if you've got a benefits arrangement,
Yes.
some people are going to be concerned about what's happening. Some people are going to be suspicious. Some people are going to worry. They need a way to communicate. And their structured system for presenting their complaints or their grievances, it needs to not have to go through the village hierarchy. Because what if the village hierarchy is part of the problem?
That's right.
Once again, we might find that the rapid expansion of mobile phones is one of our best tools. You could have a fee-free SMS complaint line, which would be fabulous, because that would allow you to collect villagers' inputs without anyone worrying about being singled out. So there's definitely some lessons we learned. I think the biggest lesson we learned is that the Ok Tedi management themselves, as well as the communities, all agree that including women at the table was a really good idea. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us.
Yeah, indeed. So barriers at the different phases as well.
Absolutely.
So the follow through is extremely
It's critical.
important. Yes.
The devil is in the details. Isn't that the saying?
Yes, indeed.
More with Laura Bailey when we come back. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, so far on the show we've featured a report on the 3rd National Mining Emergency Response Challenge hosted by OTML. We're also showcasing an interview with the country manager for the World Bank, Laura Bailey, on the topic of the Women in Mining initiative that aims to increase women's participation in the resource sector to achieve equality that will enable better development outcomes. We continue the interview with Charlene Gawi.
Are you able to share with us, Laura, some of the findings from the observation conducted by the World Bank on the Ok Tedi women and specifically the Community Mine Continuation Agreement?
Absolutely. So this was a really wonderful opportunity that was made available to us. We were able to create it with support from the Ok Tedi Mine Management Team led by Nigel Parker. Based on our review and analysis of what had happened back in 2007 and all of these findings about the Ok Tedi women, the mine was gracious enough to let us have a woman in the room. So we had a Papua New Guinean woman who observed every one of the negotiations across the entire period of 5 weeks, where each of the 9 communities who are mine-impacted communities around Ok Tedi sat down in their group and negotiated what they wanted out of the next phase of the mine. Now, unlike 2007, when there was one woman and only at the last round, the big table, in this particular arrangement, you had 3 women at each of the 9 communities. So that was 27 women. And the observations of our woman in the room who sat and watched and took notes about how the women acted, how they prepared, what they said, how they exchanged views with the men, and what they got, what they delivered, the observations were fascinating. Let me just share 3 things. The first is that the extended duration of the 5-week-long period created a great environment for women's voices to be heard. Negotiations that depend on one-off marathon sessions where everybody's in the room and nobody leaves and there's no breaks create kind of a pressure cooker environment.
Yes.
And it doesn't give a lot of space for people to trade off or to share the airtime. Well, it turns out culturally it's really important in Papua New Guinea for us to trade airtime and to share. And it was incredibly important for the women to be seen as sharing with the men. So that process of having an extended time period with a series of meetings turned out to work very, very well. Now, the next thing that turned out to be important was this unbundling. So instead of having everybody from all 9 communities in one enormous room, they first had these 9 individual community meetings. And the idea of having 3 women instead of 1, both of these structural decisions allowed the women to speak from a point of strength. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, PNG culture places a great deal of importance on the collective, the group,
voice,
rather than the individual. So having 3 women and having little groups of 3 women across all 9 allowed them to brainstorm between each other, share ideas, trade off being the one who spoke versus the one who listened. All of that was much more appropriate for the way we do things in Papua New Guinea, and it allowed the women to be much more effective. And then one final thing that we observed. Now, many but not all of these women had been part of previous sessions that helped educate them in what we call life skills. So basic literacy, public speaking, things that built their confidence. And it's obvious that experiences like that, life skills training, take really wonderful, smart, strong Papua New Guinean women and make them even stronger. So we clearly saw that. But what we also saw is that unlike in 2007, in 2012 there were no independent legal and technical experts provided. And that turned out to be a mistake. Now, it was an oversight, it wasn't anything deliberate. And it's clear from listening to the community members that the lack of independent legal advisors impacted both men and women. But our guess is that it probably impacted the women a bit more because women are less likely to have a familiarity with legal language and legal jargon unless you happen to have a lawyer in the family. And so it was clear that that was a bit of a disadvantage, but it was also clear that they were able to surmount that by asking questions. And this is the other thing that I would say to our viewers is that you know that people, women or men, boys or girls, are gaining a sense of confidence when they feel empowered to ask a question.
Ask a question or have an opinion.
Or have an opinion, exactly. Exactly.
Laura, the World Bank has a funding arrangement with the Chamber of Mines and Petroleum to promote women in mining. How did this arrangement come about and what has been the outcome so far?
Well, the Chamber was our key partner for the project that I described to you on women in mining and petroleum that went from 2005 to 2010. And we attribute much of the success of that program to the unique position and the progressive leadership of the Chamber. They mobilize and participate in a wide range of industry activities. They can persuade industry simply by virtue of their broad membership. And they're not afraid to take an innovative position to sort of get out in front and encourage people to take some risks. And they don't just speak to industry, they speak to government and they speak to communities. So that turned out to be a real strength. And I can't forget to mention something that's really turned out to be a core element of our success, which is the staff, the Papua New Guinean staff in the Chamber. They have a core group who worked throughout the first project, many of whom stayed on and are now working on the new project. And they are passionate and intelligent and dedicated and totally tuned in to the needs of communities and the interests of the mining sector, and really we couldn't do without them. So I need to give a big shout out to the staff at the PNG Chamber who work on women in mining.
Well done.
So what we did is, because we got these great results in the first project, we went money hunting. We went looking for more funding to do a second phase. And I must say that it's relatively rare for the Japan Social Development Fund, which financed our first project, relatively rare for them to do a second phase. They see themselves as a seed capital for innovation, and they usually are pretty cautious about funding phase 2, but they loved this project. The moment for me that really clicked it, that where I knew we were going to get our second round of funding, is we sponsored a video conference where we had representatives from 3 different women's groups who had participated in the project, came down to Moresby along with the women's desk officer from the mining or oil company that they worked with. And they sat in my video conference room in the World Bank office in Deloitte Tower here in Port Moresby, and they linked up by video to Tokyo to an audience that was comprised of officials from the government of Japan and members of the general public, NGOs, and students. And they talked about their experiences.
That must have been mind-blowing for them.
It was extraordinary. Imagine, if you will, a number of different Papua New Guinean women, most of whom are speaking in Tok Place, all of whom are then being translated from Tok Place into English on our end of the screen. And imagine on the other end, you've got Japanese officials who are translating from English into Japanese. So I knew we had a real winner on our hands when we ran overtime and had to ask for more satellite space.
Oh, wow.
And then afterwards, the ladies from the women's group said to me, "Boss Mary, that was really nice being on TV." So that particular moment was a great moment of international cooperation. But
Wow.
Japan Social Development Fund, in all seriousness, did see the real merits of this project. And they were persuaded that there was a whole new set of activities that we could do if we could get funding, and they've agreed. So the Chamber is, I'm very pleased to say the Chamber is our implementing partner for the new project. It's just been approved in the last few months. It will run for 4 years. It's $2 million, so it'll go from now through 2017.
The way forward for the Women in Mining initiative, that's next. Thanks for your company on the show. Looking forward, we find out from the World Bank Country Manager Laura Bailey where the Women in Mining initiative is heading and the role of all stakeholders.
Looking forward, where do you see Women in Mining initiative headed, and what role do you think all stakeholders play?
Well, I'll talk a bit about what I think we're going to do in this new project,
Yes.
and that'll give us some hints for what I think the bigger agenda is going forward. There's some very exciting things in store for us in this space. So the first thing we're going to do is build on the lessons from the first project, and that means that we'll be going back to and working again with all the same villages from phase 1. But we'll also be adding in some new areas. We'll be working with villages on Bougainville. This is incredibly important. This is the most acute example we have in Papua New Guinea of the dark side of what can happen with conflict between communities, government, and mining. So working with the women's associations all across Bougainville is incredibly important. We'll also be going to some of the much more remote petroleum areas in the highlands and in Western Province. But whereas the first project focused on building women's sense of confidence and self-reliance and essentially working on their social empowerment, the new project is going to focus much more on economic empowerment. So we're going to be having specific targeted programs to build the financial independence and the economic livelihood of households through the work that their women do. We're going to take a comprehensive approach to building women as potential micro-entrepreneurs. We're going to work with them and their families. We're going to build on previous skills, but we're going to do a lot more financial literacy, business training, skills training. And we're going to establish linkages to markets and to credit sources. And even in doing this, which is what I would call a pretty standard program of economic empowerment for rural women, we're going to be doing something a bit interesting. We're going to include space for men to be involved in some of the training so that we can create a unique forum where men and women together as economic partners can work on family enterprises to promote the family's financial independence. Because we think that partnership is really naturally where Papua New Guinean society is going. And so we want to foster and support that. Now there are two other areas that the new work will do that are much more pioneering, if you will. The first one is we'll be pioneering a new community-based approach to the really, really challenging problem of gender-based violence in mining and petroleum communities. Now, media reports often shock and scare us, but I must say that statistics, unfortunately, also reinforce a really serious message. Gender-based violence, family and sexual violence, is a serious problem in Papua New Guinea. One source of data, which is the Household Income and Expenditure Survey, which was carried out nationwide by the government in 2010, tells us that more than 2/3 of Papua New Guinean women feel threatened by or have experienced family violence. Wow. And this is not something that is limited to women of a particular tribal group or economic class or urban or rural environment. It touches all of us. Now, it's particularly a challenge in mining and petroleum and areas because you have big dramatic social changes
Yes.
Lots of men, mostly, coming in from outside, disconnected from their families, communities who have a much higher level of economic and social activity, some of which is a little problematic. Higher levels of drinking, higher levels of gambling, lots of rambunctious activity that unfortunately can serve as a breeding ground for violence.
Yeah.
Now, there are many legal and justice-based initiatives that are ongoing in the country. Most of them are excellent and homegrown. Groups like the Coalition for Change, the Family and Sexual Violence Action Committee, Médecins Sans Frontières, the Highland Defenders for Women. There are lots of great organizations, and they're focusing on prevention and on services to providers. Providing services to survivors. Now, the one thing that we think we can do that's a little bit unique is work directly with men and women together in the mining and petroleum companies. So the idea here is that we're going to pioneer a very collaborative approach to this issue, drawing upon some work that's been done in other countries, but also on things that are happening right here in Papua New Guinea with these excellent organizations that I just mentioned. And we think that in the spirit of self-reliance, which is kind of the headline for all of our work in the women in mining sector, the ultimate goal here is to support communities to identify and solve their own problems. Because these are problems that are affecting families, affecting women and girls, affecting children, but they're also problems that are best solved by Papua New Guineans. So our goal here is to support communities resolving their own problems. And then there's one last part of the new work that I'm really plugged into that I really like a lot. And this goes back to our earlier conversation about the aspirational barriers. So we're going to have a focused element of the project that is attending to the challenge of building leadership in adolescent girls. And the idea here is to work directly with adolescent girls, but also to involve adolescent boys and see if we can manage a double win. We want to help empower adolescent girls, and we want to help influence and change the way adolescent boys see adolescent girls. So we'll do a whole range of interesting things, including some that are going to be both fun and potentially transformative, like using photography, mobile phone-based photography, as a way to share and communicate about the way adolescent girls and boys see their own lives. So I think there's a lot in this space that's going to be of interest. More broadly, I guess what I would say is the challenges that Papua New Guinea faces in terms of gender equality and especially impacts on women and children in mining and petroleum areas are serious challenges. But the country is doing some very amazing things. And what I would like to see all stakeholders do is really capitalize on what's been done thus far and take it to the next level. Now, if we think back to what we talked about, the Ak Tedi women, what do the Ak Tedi women have? Well, what the Ak Tedi women have that's most important is an example. They have an example of how if government, communities, and industry can cooperate together, really pretty amazing things can happen. So there is an immediate opportunity for the government, since they're currently reviewing their mining policies and legislation, for industry, who is routinely involved in negotiating with government about either new projects or revising ongoing projects, and for communities who, because you operate in a democracy and you have the right to speak your mind and you have a vibrant open media, has an opportunity to express their views. We can see how can the things that happened at Ak Tedi happen elsewhere. Could it be in the future of Papua New Guinea that having women seated at the negotiation table becomes standard? Could it become part of the policy? Could it become part of the law? Could we see that major oil, gas, and mining companies across the country, as they review their existing projects or negotiate new ones, could they say, we'd like women to be at the table? This is the future that I see, and I think it's a bright future.
That's amazing. I just like to affirm that approach of collaborating and getting the men and then the young boys back involved in it. I think that's so important. You answered a question that I missed out as well. So thank you for that. That's all we have time for. this week, viewers. So I'd like to thank you once again. For those of you who joined us in between, Laura Bailey, the country manager for the World Bank, talking to us tonight about women in mining.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Laura.
That ends Resource PNG. If you have any comments or queries, do email us on this address, resourcepng@mtv.com.pg. Or to find out more, check MTV online, that's www.mtv.com.pg, and go to our Resource PNG page. Or you can check our page on Facebook. Thanks for your company. Bye for now.